From the halls of Brussels, the message is ambitious. From Paris, the rhetoric is defiant. And from Berlin, the tone is one of cautious confidence. The grand vision for the 21st century is called strategic autonomy. It is the single biggest idea to come out of the European Union in a generation. The promise is that Europe will no longer be a junior partner. It will rise as a third superpower, a true geopolitical pole, standing independent and equal to both Washington and Beijing. It is a vision of a sovereign Europe, a continent that determines its own destiny. But that grand vision, that powerful promise of a self-determined Europe, has just collided with a brutal, cold reality. And it didn't happen on a battlefield or at a high-stakes summit. It happened in a quiet, industrial city in the Netherlands. As we analyzed in our last report, the Nexperia scandal was a test. It was the first major test of Europe's strategic autonomy, and it failed completely. Our investigation showed that the Dutch government did not act as a sovereign power. They bent to American demands. They were pressured by Washington to sacrifice their own high-tech industry. They were forced to target not only the Chinese-owned company Nexperia, but their own national crown jewel, ASML. In the end, as one Dutch lawmaker admitted, they were selling out Dutch sovereignty for the sake of an alliance. The Nexperia case was not about Dutch national security. It was about political obedience to a foreign power's geopolitical agenda. It was about Washington using a smaller European nation as a pawn in its global chip war against China. Today, we are going to look deeper. The Nexperia scandal was not an isolated incident. It is the single most critical symptom of a much deeper disease. It is the proof of Europe's identity crisis. This is the story of a continent trapped in an impossible situation, a continent whose entire economic prosperity, led by Germany, is dependent on China, a continent whose entire security framework is dependent on the United States. For decades, Europe could have both. It could profit from Beijing while being protected by Washington. That era is over. The US-China chip war has forced a choice, and that choice is ripping the European Union apart. In this analysis, we are not just looking at the Netherlands. We are diagnosing the sickness of an entire continent. Why does Europe, time and time again, commit economic self-sabotage? And why has its greatest dream, strategic autonomy, become its most dangerous strategic illusion? Economic self-sabotage. To understand the core sickness of Europe, you must understand that Europe does not really exist. It is not a single entity. It is a fractured continent pulled in two different directions by its two most powerful members. It is torn apart by the French paradox and the German problem. The French paradox. Let's start with France, the political heart of the European project. No one speaks the language of strategic autonomy more fluently or more passionately than French President Emmanuel Macron. He is the vision's chief architect. In April of 2023, following a high-profile visit to Beijing, Macron shocked the world. He gave an interview declaring that Europe must not be a vassal of the United States. He warned that Europe must not get caught up in crises that are not ours, specifically referencing Taiwan. The backlash from Washington and other EU capitals was immediate. Allies in Eastern Europe, bordering Russia, were horrified. They saw his statement as a betrayal of the transatlantic alliance that guarantees their very existence. But Macron did not back down. He believes deeply that unless Europe builds its own independent defense and economic policies, it will be irrelevant. 1 year later, in April 2024, he gave another landmark speech at the Sorbonne. This time, the tone was even more urgent, almost apocalyptic. He warned that our Europe is mortal. It can die. And he repeated his core message: Europe must prove that it is never a vassal of the United States. He called for a massive increase in European defense spending, for a new European industrial policy, and for the courage to think of Europe as a power in its own right. This is the French paradox. France has the political will for sovereignty. It has the independent nuclear deterrent. It has the desire to lead a third pole. It sees the world changing and understands that Europe must adapt or die. But it lacks the overwhelming economic power to make the rest of Europe follow. That power does not sit in Paris. It sits in Berlin. The German problem. If France is Europe's political voice, Germany is its economic engine. And for 20 years, that engine has run on two things: cheap Russian energy and unrestricted access to the Chinese market. Now, one of those is gone, and the other is under direct threat. To understand why Europe is politically paralyzed, you must understand the German problem. While France talks about being a vassal, Germany is terrified of something far more tangible: losing its number one customer. Let's look at the numbers because they are staggering. The German automotive industry, the heart of the entire German economy, is completely dependent on the Chinese market. This is not an exaggeration. It is a statistical fact. Volkswagen, the titan of German industry, sells nearly 40% of all its vehicles in China. For BMW and Mercedes-Benz, China is their single largest and most profitable market, dwarfing their sales in the US or Europe. This economic entanglement means that for the leaders of these industrial giants, a full-blown trade war with Beijing, which is what Washington is demanding, is not a geopolitical strategy. It is economic suicide. Berlin knows this. So, while the European Commission in Brussels talks tough about de-risking, Berlin talks softly about diversifying. While France pushes for a hard line, Germany scrambles to protect its investments. Berlin talks the talk of de-risking to please Brussels, but its actions show a different priority. What is the clearest evidence of this deep structural divide? In April of 2024, at the very same time Brussels was trying to formulate a unified, tough-on-China policy, at the same time France was warning about being a vassal, what did German Chancellor Olaf Scholz do? He boarded a plane to Beijing, and he did not go alone. He brought with him a massive delegation of Germany's top CEOs, dominated by the auto industry. The visit was a direct signal to China: business as usual. The political backlash from other EU members was furious. Scholz was accused of undermining European unity. He was accused of prioritizing German corporate profits over the EU's common security. He was accused of learning nothing from the country's disastrous energy dependence on Russia. But the Germans understood the reality. China, for its part, played this division perfectly. It practices a strategy of divide and rule. It ignores the pronouncements from the European Commission in Brussels. It knows that the real power lies in Berlin. By giving German automakers preferential treatment, Beijing ensures that Germany will never agree to any unified EU policy that truly threatens China's core interests. Germany will not sacrifice the Volkswagen Audi group for the security of the Netherlands. Germany will not risk a trade war that would vaporize hundreds of thousands of German jobs just to defend a rule-based order. This is the core of Europe's identity crisis. France has the political will, but not the economic leverage. Germany has the economic leverage, but not the political will. The result is paralysis, a continent that talks loudly but is incapable of collective action. A 27-nation bloc that cannot agree on a single, coherent strategy for the most important geopolitical challenge of our time. And the cost of this paralysis, the cost of this division, is catastrophic. It is self-inflicted deindustrialization, the deindustrialization. This is the price Europe is paying for its crisis of identity. It is a slow-motion economic self-sabotage. Look at the evidence. First, consider the energy crisis. In its political obedience to Washington's policy on Russia, Europe willingly cut itself off from cheap, reliable Russian natural gas. This was a political decision, celebrated as a victory for transatlantic unity. What was the economic result? Energy prices across the continent, especially in industrial-heavy Germany, skyrocketed to levels that are permanently uncompetitive. Factories that had relied on cheap gas for decades suddenly found they could no longer make a profit. The very foundation of Germany's industrial might, cheap energy, was gone overnight. Now, consider the technology crisis. In its political obedience to Washington's policy on China, Europe is now cutting itself off from its largest technology market. As we saw with ASML, this means losing billions in revenue in its biggest growth market. It means crippling its own crown jewel to help an ally win a trade war. This is the pattern. In both cases, Europe sacrifices its own core industries, its energy supply and its technology sector, to follow an ally, the United States, that is simultaneously benefiting from Europe's weakness. The U.S. is luring Europe's industries away with the promise of cheap energy and massive subsidies under its Inflation Reduction Act. Europe is paying the price while America reaps the reward. But if you want to see the entire contradiction, the entire European crisis, embodied in one single company, you only need to look at one: BASF. This is the ultimate case study. BASF is the largest chemical producer in the world. It is the industrial heart of Germany, operating a city-sized megaplant in Ludwigshafen for over 150 years. In 2024 and 2025, BASF's leadership made a stunning announcement. The cost of energy in Europe, they said, is now so high that its home base in Germany is no longer competitive. They announced they would be forced to permanently and significantly downsize their core operations in their home country, a devastating blow to the German economy. So the question is, where did BASF decide to move its future investments? Where would this pillar of German industry spend its next $10 billion? To the United States, to take advantage of the cheap energy promised by its security partner? No. BASF is currently building its largest, most advanced $10 billion Verbund smart factory in Zhanjiang, China. This is the fact that exposes the entire European illusion. It is the final, irrefutable proof of the continent's breakdown. At the exact same moment that Brussels politicians are demanding Europe de-risk from China, at the exact same moment the Netherlands is sacrificing Nexperia and ASML to placate Washington, the single largest industrial company in Germany is fleeing the high energy costs caused by European policy and making its biggest bet in history on China. This is not strategic autonomy. This is chaos. This is a continent at war with itself, where its politics, its economics, and its security are all pulling in opposite, destructive directions. The Rude Awakening. This is the Rude Awakening. The dream is over. Now we must look at the fallout. This is not an abstract political game for elites in Brussels. This is a real-world disaster for the people on the ground. Let's go back to the Netherlands, to the center of the storm. The direct economic consequence of the Nexperia and ASML blockades was immediate. Investor confidence collapsed. The entire high-tech Dutch ecosystem, once hailed as the heart of Europe's future, was suddenly seen as isolated and unstable. Supply chains were disrupted. And most importantly, this was about people's lives. It was about the hundreds of Dutch jobs that could be lost. It was about the workers who had nothing to do with this geopolitical fight. As one technician told the Dutch media, in a quote that echoes across the continent, "We were told global trade meant opportunity. Now it means punishment for working with the wrong country." This is the thesis. This is the reality. The Rude Awakening is the realization that the grand dream of strategic autonomy has been exposed as a strategic illusion. It has been crushed between the two real opposing forces. One, the economic reality of German industrial dependence on China. Two, the security reality of Europe's total dependence on America. The Nexperia case was simply the first crack to appear under this immense pressure. It is the proof that Europe, when forced to choose, is a continent unable to make its own decisions. It is the proof that the ultimate price for political obedience to an ally is economic suicide. This leads us to our final questions. Europe's leaders talk about sovereignty, but their actions show obedience. Meanwhile, their largest corporations are fleeing to China just to survive. In this new era of great power competition, does Europe truly have any other choice? Is it already too late for them to forge their own path? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Because as Europe fractures, China is not waiting. It is building a new global order. And next week, we will analyze how China's digital Silk Road is creating a new economic bloc that bypasses both America and Europe. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you for watching.